Let's begin with the assumption almost everyone grows up believing. Mirrors flip left and right. It feels obvious. You raise your right hand, and the person in the mirror appears to raise what looks like their left. From childhood, we accept this as simple fact. Mirrors reverse sideways direction. But that explanation, as satisfying as it seems, is not actually true. A mirror does not reverse left and right at all. What it really does is far more precise and far more interesting. A mirror reverses only one direction, the direction that goes straight into it and straight back out. In other words, it reverses depth. Front becomes back, that's all. Nothing else is swapped. Nothing else is rearranged. The mirror reflects light directly backward along the path it arrived from, creating a world that is flipped only along that single axis, the one perpendicular to its surface. If you doubt this, try something simple. Stand facing a mirror and raise your right hand. Look carefully. Your reflection raises the hand on the same side of its body as yours. Its right side aligns with your right side across the mirror's plane. There is no sideways switching happening. The geometry is perfectly consistent. So why does it feel like left and right are reversed? Because when you look at your reflection, you don't think of it as a flat projection of light. You think of it as another person facing you, a version of yourself turned around to look back. And when a person turns around to face the opposite direction, their left and right sides do swap relative to yours. That's what your mind is comparing, not the reflection itself, but an imagined physical rotation of your body. The mirror doesn't perform that rotation, your mind does. In everyday life, we are deeply accustomed to understanding others through movement and orientation. When someone stands across from you, facing you, their right hand is on your left side. That's how human bodies relate when turned toward each other. Your brain automatically applies that familiar rule to the reflection, but the mirror never rotated anything. It simply reversed the direction of light, traveling forward and backward. This is where the illusion begins, not in the glass, but in perception. What's fascinating is how quickly and confidently the mind fills in explanations that feel natural, but aren't physically accurate. We trust our intuition because it feels immediate and obvious. Yet here, intuition quietly rewrites geometry into something more familiar, more human, more socially meaningful. We interpret spatial reflection as bodily orientation. We replace physics with imagination without even noticing. And that realization is bigger than mirrors. It reveals something fundamental about how we experience reality. What we see is not just what exists, it is what our minds interpret, reconstruct, and make meaningful through habit and expectation. The mirror never reversed your world. It simply revealed how easily your mind does. And perhaps the most profound insight is this: when something in reality seems strange or confusing, the distortion may not be in the world at all. It may be in the way we are standing, thinking, and looking at it. Now once we accept that the mirror itself isn't flipping left and right, the real mystery moves somewhere far more interesting into the mind. Because the sense of reversal feels so strong, so immediate, that we assume it must be happening out there in the physical world. But it isn't. The flip happens inside us. When you look into a mirror, you're not just seeing light bouncing back. You are interpreting a human figure, one that looks exactly like you, standing in front of you. And the moment your brain recognizes a human form, it automatically begins doing something very sophisticated. It tries to understand orientation. It asks, how is this person positioned relative to me? Without realizing it, your mind performs a mental rotation. You imagine stepping into the mirror and turning around to face outward, becoming the reflection, and that imagined turning is the crucial step. Because when a real person turns around to face the opposite direction, their left and right sides swap relative to an observer. So your brain concludes that the mirror must have reversed them. But notice the sequence carefully. First comes the imagined rotation, only then comes the sense of reversal. The mirror itself never did anything except reflect light straight back. The transformation happened entirely in your mental model of the situation. This is a remarkable example of how perception is not passive. Your brain is not a camera recording reality exactly as it arrives. It is an active interpreter, constantly constructing spatial meaning. It builds simulations, tests relationships, predicts motion, and fills in gaps, all in fractions of a second. What feels like simple seeing is actually complex reasoning disguised as intuition, and that reasoning is shaped by experience. In everyday life, we constantly encounter other people by turning to face them. Orientation and rotation are deeply embedded in how we understand bodies in space. So, when confronted with a reflection, something that looks like a person facing us, but behaves with perfect symmetry, the brain reaches for the closest familiar explanation. It imagines a rotated self. This is exactly the kind of hidden mental process that fascinated Richard Feynman. He loved revealing how ordinary experiences contain invisible layers of reasoning. What feels obvious often turns out to be constructed, built from assumptions so automatic we never question them. And this has philosophical weight far beyond mirrors. It suggests that many of the properties we assign to the world are really interpretations generated by our minds. We don't just observe reality, we participate in shaping how it appears to us. Our brains organize space, define relationships, and impose meaning before we are even aware of it. The mirror becomes a kind of psychological experiment happening every day in every home. It quietly demonstrates that perception is an act of imagination guided by physical input, not a direct copy of the world. Once you see this clearly, something shifts. You begin to wonder how many other certainties are actually interpretations, how many other obvious truths depend on hidden mental rotations you've never noticed. And the deeper lesson is simple but profound. Before assuming the world has changed, examine the direction your mind has turned to see it. If we move deeper into what a mirror actually does, we leave psychology for a moment and enter the clean, precise world of geometry. Because at its core, a mirror is not mysterious at all. It follows one of the simplest and most reliable rules in physics. The angle at which light arrives equals the angle at which it leaves. That's it. No preferences, no decisions, no awareness of left or right, up or down, just perfect, obedient symmetry. Imagine a beam of light traveling from your face toward the mirror. When it strikes the surface, it doesn't bounce randomly. It reflects in a way that is perfectly balanced relative to the mirror's surface. If the light approaches at a certain angle, it departs at that same angle, but on the opposite side. This is what creates the image you see. Every single ray of light from every visible point on your body follows this same rule simultaneously. The result is a structured, consistent reconstruction of the visual world. But here's the key idea. The mirror doesn't reorganize space. It reverses one dimension of direction. Specifically, it reverses the direction pointing straight into and out of the mirror. Physicists might describe this as a reversal along the axis perpendicular to the surface. Everything else remains unchanged. Left stays left, right stays right, up stays up. The only thing that flips is depth, the forward, backward direction. You can think of the mirror as creating a perfectly symmetrical extension of space behind its surface, like an invisible continuation of the world where every point is positioned exactly as far Behind the mirror as its real counterpart is in front, not a scrambled world, not a twisted world, a geometrically consistent one. And this is where things become beautifully counterintuitive. Human beings naturally organize space using body-based language, left, right, front, back, because those distinctions matter for movement and survival. But physics doesn't care about those categories. Physics describes relationships between directions, angles, and positions. The mirror is simply enforcing geometric symmetry, while we are interpreting that symmetry through human orientation. This gap between geometric truth and human interpretation is exactly the kind of thing that fascinated Richard Feynman. He often emphasized that nature operates according to precise mathematical relationships, even when our intuition tries to translate those relationships into something more familiar and often less accurate. The mirror reveals something profound. Reality is structured by laws that are indifferent to human perspective. Symmetry exists whether or not we recognize it correctly. The universe is not obligated to match our mental shortcuts. And when you really absorb that, the mirror becomes more than a household object. It becomes a demonstration of how deeply order is woven into the fabric of existence, and how easily the mind can overlook that order when it tries to impose its own framework. So, the next time you see your reflection, remember this. The mirror is not showing you a distorted world, it is showing you a perfectly lawful one. The real challenge is learning to see it without forcing reality to fit the limits of intuition. When you step back and look at everything we've uncovered, the mirror not flipping left and right, the mind performing its own hidden rotation, the precise geometry guiding every reflected ray of light, something deeper begins to emerge. The mirror stops being a puzzle about reflection and becomes a window into how we relate to reality itself. Because what this simple object reveals is not just how light behaves, but how we behave as observers. We often assume that what we experience is the world exactly as it is, clear, direct, immediate, but the mirror quietly dismantles that assumption. It shows us that even in the most ordinary moment, glancing at our own reflection, perception is already layered with interpretation, expectation, and mental construction. The physical world provides structure, but the meaning of that structure is assembled inside the mind, and that insight reaches far beyond physics. Think about how quickly the brain imposed a story on the mirror. It flips left and right. That explanation felt natural, obvious, complete. Yet it turned out to be a psychological shortcut, a convenient narrative shaped by how we understand bodies facing each other. Reality itself was simpler, cleaner, more precise than our interpretation of it. This is a pattern that repeats everywhere. Human beings are meaning-making creatures. We don't just detect patterns, we create them. We translate raw sensory input into familiar concepts, emotional associations, and intuitive explanations. Most of the time, that process helps us navigate the world efficiently, but sometimes it leads us to mistake interpretation for truth. This is why the mirror is so philosophically powerful. It exposes a gap, a subtle but profound distance between what is and what we experience, not because reality is deceptive, but because perception is active. It is shaped by memory, expectation, embodiment, and perspective. We are not passive witnesses to the world. We are participants in constructing how it appears. This realization lies at the heart of scientific thinking. It requires humility, the willingness to question what feels obvious. It demands curiosity, the courage to ask whether intuition might be incomplete. And it rewards patience, the discipline to look beyond first impressions until deeper structure reveals itself. That spirit of questioning is exactly what made Richard Feynman such a remarkable thinker. He didn't just look at the world, He examined how people understood the world, and where that understanding quietly drifted away from physical reality. For him, confusion wasn't a failure. It was an invitation, a signal that something important was waiting to be discovered beneath the surface of the familiar. And that invitation is still open to all of us, because once you realize how easily the mind reshapes what it sees, everyday life becomes filled with new questions. What else feels obvious but isn't? What beliefs are reflections of reality, and which are reflections of perspective? How often do we accept explanations simply because they feel intuitive, not because they are true? The mirror teaches us that clarity begins when we separate observation from interpretation, when we learn to notice not just what we see, but how we are seeing it. And perhaps the most meaningful lesson is this: understanding the world requires more than looking outward. It requires looking inward at the mind that is doing the looking.